Hi there, I'm Sandy Allnock with your monthly segment of Create in Color. And I'm excited to bring you another MFT video, this time with the Safari Friends stamp set. It's got a lot of fun sentiments that go with each of the animals in it, but I wanted to focus on the lion. I'll tell you a little bit about why later in this video. But the animals are really fun, they're easy to watercolor, so I'm going to do a watercolor since it is World Watercolor Month, but I want to do something to really feature this lion. And I decided to make it more of a circus thing rather than a safari thing. And I want to show you how I made this background. I started out by using some masking fluid. There's a lot of different brands, but this is a Grumbacher one. And what I found is a lot of the other brands have dried over time. I don't use my masking fluids very often. And this one has not dried and the others have. So there you go. And I had that little blue liquid. That was just a little bit of dishwashing soap I put in a little Dixie cup, because if you treat your brush first with a little bit of that soap, and it doesn't matter what brand, then the stuff won't stick to it as much. So you can rinse it off right away really quickly and not ruin your brush. Although I do tend to keep some brushes on hand that are just for masking fluid rather than using my good ones. And I'm using a big fat wide brush here because I want to do a full background. And this one in particular, I like how it releases color and releases water from it for doing large backgrounds like this. And I'm leaving a kind of that highlight on the ground from the light. I didn't draw it first, and you can choose to draw it first, but then you're worrying about whether you've trapped your lines underneath of the paint, and that to me is more painful than just kind of working through trying to get that oval to look correct. And you can resize it when you're doing it just kind of on the fly like this. The color that I'm using here is Payne's Blue Gray. And I like Payne's Blue Gray because it has a little more life to it than Payne's Gray or than any kind of black color. So it's got a little more to it, which is kind of nice to use for something like this. Even though it's going to look like a black paint, it has just more options to it. And I didn't use a granulating one. I'm using some rough watercolor paper, and that's what's going to give me some of the texture that's going to show up that you'll see in just a few minutes. And just kind of putting on a good coat of paint here, and then I'm going to dry it. But I'm not drying it completely. I'm drying it only enough that if I look at it on the side that the sheen goes away. And I want to stop before it's completely dry because I want to wash off the paint. I had a watercolor teacher once, well, I should say a couple times. I've taken his class several times. He's one of the few teachers that blew my mind with the kinds of things he creates when he washes paint off. And this may upset some crafters and think, well, if you're going to put the paint on, don't wash it off. Well, sometimes you get really cool effects from washing it off. And here you can get a really cool marbly effect on the rough paper. And it depends on how dry the paint is underneath whether this works or not. So I was looking for that background. I'm not worried about the two, excuse me, the left and the right side. The blossom that's going on with those is not something of concern because that's going to all get covered up. But I wanted that interesting background behind him because when light cascades down onto something in this kind of a situation, you don't get just a pure bit of light coming down. You get some modeling in the background, and if it's going to look like he's in the center ring of a circus, there's going to be something behind that, and the light is going to filter, and you're going to have a little bit less light, and it's really going to hit on the ground and be nice and bright. So then I take a slightly thicker paint and start increasing the contrast on the left and right side. So that's going to give me more of that concentrated bit of color that's coming down to outline the shaft of light. And right here, sorry, my big fat hand is in the way. The right hand side of my brush ran out of paint a little bit, and I thought, oh, I like how it filters out and got a little soft there. So I thought, let me see if I can figure out how to loosen up that edge. And I was going to start by just putting some water up there. I had some paint on my brush, ended up having to clean it off again so that I could fix that and try to pull that out, just kind of wet it more, and then took a tissue and just kind of softened that up a little bit. Don't mind that it's a little darker at the top, adds more interest to it. And then I just took my brush, which was mostly dry, and ran it over top of the paint so that I could sort of soften that edge on the right hand side. and add a little more to the bottom. I don't want that bottom edge to lose its nice sharp edge. Just want the left and right side to have a little filtering going on. And you can see that Payne's Blue Gray gives me a really nice, rich color by the time this next layer is done. So once I'm relatively satisfied with that, I can dry it and do the same thing again. And you can do this over and over to get a really rich, deep black color. But notice that I still have that really light part in the center. I have that contrasting grayish type of area. And I'm just going to do the same thing and do another layer and make it nice, rich, and dark. My paper is actually glued down using some ATG tape onto my board. And you want to make sure that this is not on something that's glass. So I have my Tim Holtz glass mat is underneath of this, but I've painted on that and realized that was a bad thing because that really pushes all that moisture back into the paper. Even having it taped down to a board like this does that effect somewhat. So what I definitely recommend is just always having a little bit of room around the outside edge that you're going to cut off anyway. So I do plan to trim this down because you can see some of that paint is just seeping back into the edges. So I'll have funky edges on this. I have stopped doing the taping down of my paper for the most part because you still catch a lot of paint right around those edges, especially when you're doing thick coatings like this, that I find it's a little bit easier to deal with if I just know I'm going to cut off that outside edge on a card anyway. There's sometimes when I'm doing some finished paintings that I'll tape them down, but not always. And so it's just kind of one of those things that you can determine for yourself whether or not that's something you want to worry about or whether you'd rather just tape your paper down or glue your paper down like I have done here. And then doing another heat drying. So you can decide how many layers of paint you want. I think there's 3 here, and I could continue to do more, but I'm just going to dive right into removing all of that masking fluid now from my little lion. And note, by the way, that I let the masking fluid dry completely before doing any of the painting, so don't do it right away. And I'm going to start out with a little bit of Hansa Yellow Light. And what I really want to do is create this lion so that he looks more majestic than cartoonish. Because I recently read a story in the news about lions in South Africa who ate rhino poachers. Rhino poachers broke into this area where there's rhinos and they got eaten by lions. And I thought, you know, I don't rejoice in the death of anyone, but there is something poetic about lions taking care of their own. And if you're going to be a poacher and you're going to die out there somehow, I can't imagine that there would be a more just way to do it than some of the animals that you might be poaching. So I wanted this to feel a little bit less cartoonish, because I do see a lot of people use my backgrounds from things like my underwater scenes class or some of my other Copic classes, and they do these really beautiful, realistic backgrounds, and then they put a cartoonish image on it. And right now, this is very cartoonish colors because I'm using a little bit of Aussie Red Gold with that Hansa Yellow. And you can see it's just a nice bright orange color. And I'm seeing better colors than you're seeing here. The outside is actually much richer and darker. The lighting on something like this is just challenging to figure out how to make it come out quite accurate. But I'm going to use some of that same Payne's Blue Gray and add it in the deepest, darkest shadow areas. And I want you to not have a heart attack yet, because yeah, it's a very, very strong bit of contrast here. And what I wanted to do was continue that drama. I've got the drama in the background scene. I want the drama on the animal, and I don't want him to look like a cartoon. Now, he is a cartoon, so there's a little bit of that going on. So I've used a damp brush to start moving some of that color around so that it's not, you know, solid Payne's Blue Gray all over the place. And just using that damp brush to move the color around a little bit. And it's adding a deep contrasting shadow on the bottom. So I've got the bright Hansa Yellow light on the top, all the way down. I have that immediate contrast. Because if you were actually looking at a lion and he was really in strong light like this, you would actually see really dark shadows underneath of him because the contrast is so high in this kind of lighting. So just kind of playing around with this. I'm waiting for the paint to settle a little bit before I decide how far I'm going to go with different aspects of this. And, you know, just moving the paint around, and I decided I wanted to move a little bit now on his face. So we have a little bit of that contrast to start pulling the nose to look like it's coming forward. And then added a little bit of shadow underneath of him so that he has some shadow underneath his little body. And then I wanted a little bit more darkness because that was starting to wash out so much. But now I'm at the point where I'm satisfied with the shadows, and what I do is squint at a point like this to see if there are any jarring areas, and he looks pretty good to me from squinting at that to be able to see how well I've done with that. I used some really solid color then for his nose to give him a strong nose color, and then I went back in with a little more of the Aussie red gold and did every other one of the little bits of his mane. It'll add a little more brightness to it, take away the sting of, oh my gosh, she put all that dark shadow in there. But you can go back into something like this with a few more areas to create a little more of that brightness of color while leaving all that rich, dark power of the light cascading down onto this lion. So in my mind, he's the little guy who ate the poachers. Good for him. Bad for the poachers. They need to learn to just not poach. And that's about it for today. Hope you enjoyed my video. I will see you again next month. All the information is over on the blog. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.